Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are or however you may be listening, I want to welcome you to Encourage, Equip, and Inspire episode 25, where we are going to talk about faith, authority, and compassion. So it's good to be with you all. For me, as I'm recording this, I'm here on a beautiful, quiet Sunday morning. I'm enjoying a nice cup of coffee. The air is a little bit cool, which I just love in the mornings, especially in the summertime. The birds are out in full force, and it's just a great time of year to be in New England. So really enjoyed it. I hope you are enjoying your day wherever you are and whatever that may bring to you. As our title says, the purpose of these talks and the content on the YouTube channel and on this audio podcast is to encourage, equip, and inspire you to be a source of light and a force of good in the world. We need more goodness in the world, and we need more light because the world is dark and the world is full of a lot of evil, as you know, and things that are just really are not good. And that weighs heavily upon us, and it discourages us, and it causes us to just want to give up. But my hope is that to just keep a small candle alive for saying, don't give up. Let your light shine, however small it may be. Do whatever good you can, wherever you may be. And that's where I'm going to end up today, is we need to do the good that we can, not the good that we can't. So the greatest source of inspiration for me, and I believe for a lot of people, and I would dare say you can make an argument for the greatest source of inspiration for everyone, although it depends on the culture and time you grew up in, is the life of Jesus Christ. By the life of Jesus Christ, I mean the teachings of Jesus Christ, the death on the cross of Jesus Christ, the resurrection, and ongoing presence, I believe, of Jesus in our lives through the Holy Spirit. Now, I believe that God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and God lives in them. That's from the writings of Jesus' follower, the Apostle John. So I believe that everyone benefits from the love of God. This air I'm breathing, the sky I'm seeing, the grass that's growing outside my window, all of the materials that God placed into the earth and then gave us the knowledge to make the things that are here, the table, the chairs. My life itself, waking up this morning, is a gift from God. As a lot of people like to say, I give thanks to God because when my feet hit the ground this morning, I had another day. So I believe in God. I believe in God expressed in Jesus Christ. And I believe that Jesus shows us the way to live. Now, most people that I meet or run into, they have a respect for Jesus. They understand that his teachings are good, which is interesting because sometimes I think there's more respect for Jesus from people who aren't so-called Christians than from people who are. And I won't go too far into that, but that kind of sets up the story that I want to look at from the Gospel of Luke this morning about someone from the outside showing great faith and respect to Jesus. And it's not that Christians don't respect Jesus and have faith in Jesus, but sometimes, honestly, we disrespect Jesus by the way that we live. When we live in a way that is blatantly and visibly opposite of the way Jesus taught, even if it's maybe not all of his teachings, but there's a certain area in which we're completely missing the point, it can be a real damaging thing to the reputation of Christ. It can show people that our own selfishness gets in the way. There's so many examples, and again, I won't go into all of them today, but it's clear from the Gospels that we should help the poor. So when people are doing things like neglecting the poor to the extent where people who are poor are continually suffering, then I think we've kind of shown ourselves to be like the opposite of what Jesus taught us to be. And Jesus said that when we treat the poor, and he named some specific groups of people that would not have as much as others, people who need food, people who need water, people who need a place to stay, sometimes people who are in prison, people who are suffering from illnesses, that require them to be hospitalized or in-house for a long period of time, that the respect and kindness we show those people reflects and is an example and is the respect and kindness that we show to Jesus Christ himself. So I want to talk about faith in Jesus Christ and respect for Jesus Christ. And I also want to talk about the compassion of God that is expressed in Jesus Christ. And then talk about one of the ways that we struggle when we feel like God is not doing things for us or working for us. So the stories I want to look at this morning are from the Gospel of Luke. And we're going to go to Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. So if you're able to, sit back, relax, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to enter in to this narrative. When Jesus had finished saying all these things to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with him. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. So the narrative begins when Jesus had finished saying this to all the people. Well, what had he just finished saying? Well, in Luke's gospel, we call it the Sermon on the Plain, because it's the Sermon on the Mount that Matthew records in his gospel, but in a much more condensed format. And one might say even giving us the highlights or the cliff notes of what Jesus was trying to say. And so in Jesus' teaching, there were four main things that he was trying to share about what it meant to follow the way of God the way we're supposed to. So Jesus' teaching can be summed up in this one statement: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus himself said that's the summary statement. And then in Luke, he gives four specific things of how we can do that. So if we were to sum up all of the teachings of Jesus and the way that Jesus wants us to live, it would be these four things: love your enemies, don't judge other people, bear good fruit, and build your life on the right foundation. Again, love your enemies, don't judge, bear good fruit, build your life on a good foundation. So this narrative is intentionally placed here because Jesus is doing the very first thing that he said we should do, which is to love our enemies. So the Romans were enemies of the Jews. The centurion mentioned in this story was a leader in the Roman army, the occupying army that was in Jerusalem. The Roman Empire was occupying countries and had taken over countries that were not their own. And the Romans were the oppressors. They were oppressing the people because they were restricting what they could do. They were taxing them heavily. They were in control. They could treat the people underneath them however they wanted, like dogs, slaves, or worse. In fact, in Roman society, a slave really was property, in the sense that the owner could do anything they wanted to the slave. So again, there's varying different examples of the kind of relationship someone had. But again, it was an oppressive foreign system built on domination, control, accumulation of resources, wealth. And it's important to note, before we go any further, that we as Americans like to identify with the Jewish people in the Bible, unless, of course, we're Jewish, and then obviously you should identify with the Jewish. But to be honest, for us white European Americans, we are more like Rome than we are like the Jewish people. We are the ones that have the power and the privilege in this country. And again, I know I'm using broad strokes, but bear with me, because I feel like most of us listening to this have some kind of power or privilege. And I think for those of us who can acknowledge that we have power and privilege in society, we need to look to the lessons we can learn from the people that are most like us in the Bible. And the Roman centurion, I think, would be one of those people. So we notice that the Roman centurion had a lot of admirable qualities for someone who was in a position of power and whose culture around him taught him to look down upon other people. First of all, he really loved the Jewish people and he took care of them and he built their synagogue. And the fact that the Jewish elders were willing to go out to Jesus on behalf of this Roman centurion says something about the character and the quality of man that this centurion was. I mentioned how masters and slaves treated each other. Well, here we have a positive example because he had a servant who really was a slave who was ill and he really cared about him and he wanted him to be healed. So we see this man acting in ways that I believe reflect the teachings of Christ. You know, he was also loving his enemies because he was taught that the Jews were enemies because that's who you conquer, right? You don't go over and take over and live in the house of your friend and tell them what to do, right? No, if you're going to, as a country, go into another country and take it over and tell them how to live and control their lives, then you perceive them as an enemy. You don't do that with a friend. And so he was loving his enemies, built a synagogue for them, treated them in such a way that they felt like he really loved them, they said. Cared for his servant to the point where when he was ill and he couldn't do anything more for him, he heard about Jesus, he heard about the power of Jesus, he was aware of what was going on with Jesus, and he sent his Jewish friends to come and see Jesus. Now, Jesus is also modeling love for enemies because the Romans were definitely enemies of the Jews. The Jews believed that they should be free from Roman power and that the Roman authority in their lives was something that was oppressive and something that they desperately desired to be free from. So also the Jews considered everyone who was not Jewish a Gentile. And in dealing with Gentiles, you had to be very careful because they believed that they needed to separate themselves as the holy people of God and retain a certain purity. So Jesus going into the centurion's house would have been offensive to some people, would have been concerning to other people. And this Roman centurion is savvy enough to know that. I think that's one of the reasons why he doesn't want Jesus to have to come into his house. He understands those dynamics that are in play. But Jesus is impressed with the faith of this centurion. And Jesus is moved in a way that he's rarely moved in the Gospels. Luke says that Jesus was amazed at the faith. There's only one other time that word's used, and it's when Jesus is amazed at the unbelief of the people in Nazareth. So we see that faith is something that really attracts the attention of God. And faith is something that Jesus is drawn to. And Jesus heals this man's servant because of the faith that he saw in him. But it wasn't just the faith. We must have faith in God. We must have faith in Jesus Christ. It was the respect for Jesus. He said, listen, I know that I am a man under authority and I have people underneath me. And if I tell them go, they go, come. All I need is the word from you. You know, he understood that it was straightforward. Jesus had the ability, but also the authority to heal. And with that authority, you don't have to do a lot of lights and sounds, and you don't have to jump up and down, and you don't have to do all of this work. Jesus heals and can heal and does heal with just a word because Jesus has the authority to do that. And this Roman centurion understood that. So he not only had faith in Jesus, friends, but he respected the authority of Jesus Christ. So then we come to the next story, scene number 2. Soon afterwards, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the dead man sat up and began to talk. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. And they were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us." They said, "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. Wow. So in this case, we see Jesus not just healing, but bringing someone back to life. In the first story, Jesus heals from a distance. Doesn't even have to be there. Says the word, he's healed. In this case, Jesus walks up to the bier, it's called, the platform, the stretcher that they were carrying this dead man on. And he goes up and he comes close enough to speak, to touch, to be there. And in the first time, Jesus heals because the centurion had faith, and Jesus was amazed in a way he hadn't been amazed to that point. In this case, it's not on the basis of faith. The woman made no request. Jesus didn't know the woman, for all that we know. She was deep in her grief, and she didn't even have the wherewithal in her grief to ask for anything because she didn't know what she was going to do. She was extremely vulnerable. A widow had no source of income if their husband was gone, making them a widow, and they had no sons. She would have been in a very vulnerable, precarious position, completely reliant upon the leaders of the town and the elders taking care of her, or some family having the compassion to do the right thing. Jesus sees her and is filled with compassion. So in this case, Jesus heals solely because of the compassion for this woman and her situation that Jesus feels in his spirit. And I think it's amazing to pair these two stories together. Jesus heals because of the faith of the person, acknowledging that faith included a respect for who Jesus was. In this case, Jesus heals for a widow at the opposite end of the political spectrum, or the life spectrum. Wow, think about that. In that society, you have a Roman centurion here, and you have a widow without any means of support down here. You have the two opposites of society. And at the top end of society, Jesus is moved to act because of the faith and respect of that person. And at the lowest places of society, Jesus is moved to act without being asked, simply because of his great compassion for the person in that situation. I think that's a lesson right there. Jesus wants, desires, is willing, has the authority, and does help everyone. But what he's looking for from the people who are at the top of society is faith and a respect for who he is, and a respect for his authority, God's authority. And what he's looking for at the people at the lowest ends of society is not for them to do a thing, but simply out of his great compassion, because God is love. And that's just what love does, is it reaches out and it helps those people. And I think that's a beautiful picture of God presented to us in Jesus Christ. So what are a couple of applications? One, where do you find yourself on that scale? Most of us are probably somewhere in the middle. We may not have as much power and privilege as a Roman centurion. We may not be as destitute as a widow who's just lost her only son and has no money whatsoever. But wherever we are, we can look to these stories and we could say, how can I be inspired? What can I take away? Well, if I am towards the upper end of society, if I have some power and some privileges, I should not only have faith in Jesus Christ, but I should respect Jesus Christ and respect Jesus' authority. And what does that mean? Well, when Jesus says the word, gives the command, and it happens, he has the authority to say yes or to say no. When we demand that Jesus or God always say yes to us, then we are not respecting their authority to make the decisions that are best for us. Let me say that again. When we demand that God always comes through for us, or we expect that God will always come through for us, that of course means in the way we want it to happen, we don't respect God, because God has the authority to say yes, God has the authority to say no. Part of our faith, part of the growth journey of our faith is learning to accept the no from God. Learning to accept life as it is, not as we want it to be. Learning to say, today I may not have everything I want. I'm worried that I'll have everything I need, but I will accept what God has given me today. Jesus taught us to pray saying, give us today our daily bread. Give me what I need for today to accomplish what you want me to do today. That is a great prayer. That is a transformative prayer. That is a daily prayer mantra that can change your mindset. If you were to say, God, give me everything I need today to do what you want me to do today. It acknowledges the ability of God to give us everything that we need. But it also acknowledges the authority of God to give us only what we need. And what he gives us is for what God wants us to do. Friends, just a simple question. Do you respect the authority of Jesus Christ in your life? Something to think about. Something for me to think about. Number two, if you find yourself at the lower end of society, if you find yourself constantly suffering because of oppression, suffering because of systems that we've put in place to keep certain people down, suffering not because of anything you've done, but just because the society you live in has deemed that you are unworthy, or that you are not good enough, or that you are somehow so different. Just know this, in your grief, God sees you and God is moved by your grief. If you are in that place like the widow of just raw grief, raw sadness, know that God will be there for you when you need it the most. God is there when you need it the most, not because of anything you say or do, but because that's who God is. And I say that believing that that's what Jesus' life has taught me. And I say that believing that with all my heart. And I'm afraid because I feel like someone in a really bad situation might be crying out to God and feel like God is not there. But I'm going to choose to believe that God is there, that God is there, and that this message is somehow reminding you of that God is there. Like, you may not be able to see him through the tears, you may not be able to feel him through the pain in your heart, but when you can't see or feel the presence of God, let my voice remind you. Let my voice be a small light in your darkness that says God is still there and God cares. Because finally, I want to talk about that frustration that we all have. And that's when we're suffering, we're hurting, and God doesn't answer our prayer. Well, doesn't answer with a yes. Many of us have prayed for loved ones to be healed, and they have not been healed, and they have suffered for a long time. And we are grieving the loss of people who've died, that we've prayed that they wouldn't die. And we are in really hard financial situations where we don't know where the next meal is coming from, or where we don't know how the bills are going to get paid, or we're worried about what's going to happen to us as we get older, or we simply are working a job that we're just suffering under, that's not making enough money. We find ourselves vulnerable and alone, like the widow. And we don't see God coming to our house. We don't see God showing up. We lose our last hope, like this woman lost her only son. And God is not there to give us our son or daughter back, or to give us our hope back. And so we question God. You did it for them. Why not me? We say, God, I want to believe in you. I respect your authority to say no. I am in great need. God, where are you? God, where are you? Can I just tell you that it's okay to feel that? And maybe you just need to voice those words, either out loud or in a journal. Because when we're honest with how we feel, in a strange way, it opens us up more to the presence of God. So to deal with this last question, which is really an important one, and one we struggle with, as I was studying these two stories, I noticed a third story. So here's your third story to answer that question. It's John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, in prison. In prison, because he challenged King Herod, he challenged his immorality, and he was thrown in prison for standing up for what is right. and he's suffering in prison. And we know from the Gospels that eventually he's going to be beheaded in prison. That John the Baptist, who gave his life to serving God, who acknowledged Jesus, who had faith in Jesus and acknowledged the authority of Jesus, who chose to live a life of extreme need and poverty, knowing that God would provide everything he needed. Now in jail, one of the lowest levels of society, probably barely eating, wondering what's going to happen to his life. Death is imminent, and a horrible, violent death at that. And he sends word to Jesus. He sends people to say, are you the Messiah, or should we look for someone else? Wow. That's raw and honest. John the Baptist said, Jesus, you're doing all this stuff for everyone else. Why not me? Why not me, Jesus? Why not me? Why not me? Oh. And Jesus sends back word to John. He says, listen, John, look at what you see happening. Look at what you see happening. And is that enough to see what I'm doing? To believe that I am the one, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. He tells the friends, the messengers that came from John, go back and tell John what you have just seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the wretched of the earth have God's salvation hospitality extended to them. Is this what you were expecting? Then count yourselves fortunate. I love that last line from the Message. The wretched of the earth have God's salvation hospitality extended to them. Good news is being proclaimed. People are being healed. God will raise us from the dead. That's a choice we have to make now. We can't prove it. We can't experience it. We don't know. But I think Mary and Martha were in a similar situation when they were like, Jesus, how come you didn't come soon enough? How come you didn't come and keep Lazarus from dying? Why didn't you come and heal him? Jesus, why not us? Why not me? And Jesus told them, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. Another great prayer mantra for us to use every day. To remember that Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. It's a promise. And that promise can be hope that grows within us. So that whether we see it in our own lives or not, when we see God at work, wherever in the world, in whose ever life, we acknowledge it as God. And we choose to believe that God heals and God raises from the dead. And Jesus is the resurrection. And Jesus is life. And that when we choose to believe in Jesus, even though we die, even though it may and will kill us, we know that we will live again because Jesus is alive. And that's our message of hope this morning. So, a couple of takeaways. One, choose faith. Choose to put your faith in Jesus Christ for everything in your life. Number two, ask yourself the hard question, do I respect the authority of Jesus in my life? What does that mean or look like for me? Number three, when I am in suffering and raw, painful emotions, even though I can't see it or feel it, I want you to know that God is there. And finally, rejoice that God is at work, wherever God is at work. And believe that no matter what happens to you, even if it should kill you, even if you die, yet shall you live. Because Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Friends, I hope you've been encouraged, equipped, and inspired. If you feel like this would encourage, equip, or inspire anyone you know, please share it with them. And I pray the blessings of the presence and the power of Jesus Christ in your life today and always. Amen.